Welcome to this explainer. When we think about historical events, we usually picture the rulers, the grand empires, or the massive battles. But we almost never pause to consider the sheer, gritty, physical friction of getting a simple message from point A to point B. Today, we're going to reconstruct those ancient human worlds, stepping away from the kings for a moment and looking closely at the ordinary people, the sensory environments, and the staggering human willpower that actually made ancient communication possible.
To truly understand our ancestors, we absolutely have to wrap our heads around this profound truth. Every single letter sent in antiquity wasn't just a text message. It was a physical triumph over geography, over harsh climates, and over the absolute limitations of muscle and bone.
Section 1. The materiality of words. Well, before a message could even travel, it had to be born in physical form, and that form was entirely constrained by the local geography. There was no universal standard for paper. The very act of writing was an intensely physical, highly localized craft. In Mesopotamia, scribes used the abundant clay from river valleys. You'd press your wedges into the damp, heavy earth and then leave it out in the blazing sun to bake. Down in the Nile Valley, the Egyptians harvested river reeds, slicing, layering, and violently pounding the fibers together to create a flexible, lightweight sheet of papyrus. Meanwhile, over in the Greco-Roman world, everyday accounting and letter drafting happened on wooden tablets filled with a dark layer of beeswax. The beauty of the wax was that it could be smoothed over and infinitely reused. And the ink? If you were writing on papyrus or parchment, scribes mixed carbon, soot, and gum, or they actually brewed a dark iron gall ink derived from oak galls. That's literally the hard growths formed when wasps attack oak trees.
Now, at the heart of this was a simple tool called the calamus. This, alongside the bone or metal stylus used for wax tablets, formed the everyday technological foundation for administration across the entire Mediterranean. A scribe would literally chew the end of a hollow reed to create a frayed, brush-like nib. And remember, they didn't just casually drag a pen across a page like we do. Writing on clay required precise, downward-pressing motions with a sharp stylus. It was a rhythmic lifting and stamping rather than a smooth flow.
Section 2. Securing the secret message.
Okay, so once a high-stakes message was written, say a property sale or a spy dispatch, it desperately needed physical protection from interceptors. Without modern mass-produced lick-and-stick envelopes, the Mesopotamians came up with a genius solution. They literally baked tamper-evidence security right into their clay. Here's how it worked. When a contract was finalized, the scribe wrapped the freshly inscribed tablet in a thin, folded sheet of more clay, creating a physical envelope. The exact same agreement was written on this outer layer, and witnesses rolled their identifying cylinder seals across it. If a merchant later claimed they were owed more barley than agreed upon, a judge would physically crack open the outer clay envelope in court. If the inner text matched the outer text, the truth was undisputed. No way around it.
Centuries later, in the era of paper, European monarchs engineered something called a spiral lock. This was a highly complex letter locking technique, essentially creating a physical paper vault that would visibly tear if intercepted. Queens like Elizabeth I and Mary, Queen of Scots, utilized this ingenious method all the time. They would slice a razor-thin strip of paper right from the margin of the letter, fold the main document into a tight little packet, punch a hole straight through every single layer, and then painstakingly thread that attached paper strip through the hole over and over in a spiral. Finally, they locked the end in place with sealing wax. It was a total masterpiece of physical engineering. You simply could not read the letter without ripping that paper lock to shreds, immediately exposing the tampering to whoever received it.
Section 3. The human engine of delivery.
So a perfectly secured message is completely useless if it doesn't move. And that movement relied entirely on sheer human and animal endurance. For the ordinary Roman, or even for elites like Cicero, there was absolutely no public postal service for private mail. Instead, they had to rely on a complex, messy social web of traveling acquaintances, trusted household slaves known as tabelleri domestici, or highly educated courier clients. If you lived in Rome and wanted to send a letter to a friend down in Pompeii, you couldn't just drop it in a mailbox. You had to navigate a social maze. You might hunt down a merchant heading south, or hand your letter to a friend's enslaved servant who just happened to be making the trip. Being a professional courier back then meant you weren't just a walker, you were an educated navigator of Rome's strict patron-client system. You were deeply respected, and your entire job was to guard the secrets of the elite.
To put this into perspective, these couriers suffered dusty, grueling treks, averaging just 25 miles a day in bone-rattling wagons. Picture it.
The intense, suffocating heat of a Mediterranean summer, the blinding dust kicked up from unpaved sections of the road, and the sheer physical exhaustion of sitting in a wooden cart completely devoid of suspension. This was not a passive wait for a notification. This was visceral, agonizingly slow physical labor.
Section 4. State Networks of Empire.
While ordinary citizens had to beg favors from friends, vast empires built highly regimented state networks to hold their conquered territories together, like the famous Roman cursus publicus. Yet here is the harsh reality. The immense burden of this system fell directly onto the shoulders of ordinary provincials. They were legally forced to supply the animals, the carts, and the food that kept the Roman state running. And this system was strictly forbidden to private citizens unless you managed to get an imperial permit, a diploma signed by the emperor himself. It wasn't a modern post office, it was an infrastructural skeleton of relay stations. If a Roman magistrate needed a fresh horse or an ox, the local village had to surrender theirs. It was a crushing tax obligation that broke the backs of local peasants. Later on, the Byzantine Empire built right upon that Roman foundation, utilizing agents under the powerful master of offices to monitor those same postal routes. Over time, the couriers delivering mail seamlessly morphed into an incredibly sophisticated spy network. It was the perfect cover, really, ensuring that the emperor always knew exactly what was happening in the farthest, darkest corners of the Eastern Roman Empire.
But if we're talking about scale, we have to talk about the Mongols. To control the largest contiguous empire in human history, the Mongols engineered a communications network of unprecedented scale called the Yam system. Under Kublai Khan, they maintained an astonishing 300,000 horses across 10,000 Asian way stations, just an unbelievable logistical feat.
Now, what truly set the Mongol Yam apart was its unparalleled speed and the sheer physical toll it took on the riders. These couriers literally bound themselves to their mounts with tight bands to survive riding up to 250 miles a day. That drastically outpaces later empires. Compare the Romans' 25 miles a day, or the later Ottoman Empire's 55 miles, to the Mongol riders. To achieve 250 miles in a single day, these men pushed human endurance to its absolute biological breaking point. They tightly wrapped their heads, chests, and stomachs in thick bands to prevent their internal organs from violently jarring as they galloped without stopping. They rode through the pitch black of night holding torches, jumping from an exhausted horse directly onto a fresh one at the next way station. It was so fast that a fresh piece of fruit picked in Beijing could actually be delivered to the emperor 220 miles away by nightfall.
Section 5. The Winged Messengers.
Of course, sometimes terrestrial networks were simply too slow, and humanity took to the skies. The ancients figured out pretty early on that birds possessed biological compasses we are only just beginning to fully understand today. The Egyptians used them to signal the flooding of the Nile. Romans would literally pluck swallows from their nests, bring them to the chariot races, dye their feathers with the winning team's colors, and release them to fly home with the news. By the time of the Crusades, Islamic states maintained vast, highly centralized breeding dovecotes. The pigeon post was so incredibly effective that the Christian forces were completely overwhelmed by this Muslim aerial intelligence. Their solution? They had to train falcons as literal anti-aircraft interceptors, unleashing them to rip the pigeon messengers out of the air mid-flight.
But as amazing as these birds were, they faced a massive logistical hurdle. Think about it. A homing pigeon only flies in one direction, back home. You can't just hand a pigeon a note and tell it where to go. Their absolute, unwavering devotion is to their home roost. This meant that to send a message, merchants and armies had to physically march onto the battlefield, lugging wagons full of cooing, anxious birds in secure cages. Only when disaster struck or victory was won would the commander carefully strap a tiny leather scroll to the bird's leg and let it go, relying entirely on the animal's desperate instinct to return home.
As we conclude this explainer, I want to leave you with this thought to reflect upon. The next time you hit send on a text message, just take a second to remember the baked clay, the melted wax, the grueling unpaved roads, and the incredible human willpower that first taught the world how to stay connected. We live in an era where communication is entirely invisible and instantaneous. Yet, for nearly all of human history, passing a single thought from one mind to another across a distance required sweat, dust, bleeding hands, complex social maneuvering, and the brutal taxation of the poor. It required cracking open baked clay, meticulously slicing paper spirals, riding until the human body simply gave out, and trusting a fragile bird to find its way across a warring landscape. Thank you so much for joining me in uncovering this hidden history. Until next time, keep exploring the brilliant, complex reality of our human past.